We are back talking Season 2, Episode 1 of... We open with a fight in the sky between Invincible versus Immortal. We see that Immortal has the upper hand on Invincible up until Omni-Man comes out of nowhere and immediately cuts off Immortal's arm and hits him with a two-piece combo, followed by chopping off his other arm as he cuts off his head, leaving Mark to crushing it. Now, Omni-Man was hopeful that Immortal would see the truth just as Mark did. We learn that Mark and him are in search for something. We hear Mark on a loop giving a speech to the remaining people of this Earth after they took over this planet to be a part of their Ventrum Empire. We meet members of the survivors of this Earth's resistance group as we have Robot, a hardened version of Eve, and we meet a version of a new and very important character for this new season by the name of Angstrom, as he's found what is called null energy, which is supposed to affect Omni-Man, which, speaking of, they find this resistance hangout. As Robot hits Omni-Man with his energy blast and it does absolutely nothing to him, we see that they proceed to take out these members of the group with ease. We see Mark shows Eve mercy by not killing her, but instead he paralyzes her and says that someone's going to take care of her as they are prepared to kill the ones left. We see Angstrom promises them justice will come to them, and just as he's about to die, a portal appears and he vanishes, leaving the rest to die. As we'll learn later, this is a whole different universe altogether, one in which Mark doesn't fight his dad, but instead he joins him. Cut to seeing our version of Mark, let's call him Prime Mark, as he's visiting the mountain where he last saw his dad who almost killed him, as we see that he's trying to be the hero that this world needs, as he's stopping fires, he's stopping a rhino villain, he's stopping robbers and helping those that are in need. But we see he still suffers from PTSD at moments, and he still thinks about that day as we are witnessing life after Omni-Man. You see Mark and his mom Debbie are both trying to get back to some type of normalcy in their regular life. Cut to the Mauler twins back in prison trying to convince Pete to give them better food after sparing his life last season because they could have killed him, but they didn't because they like him, and they promise next time that they escape that they won't kill him, which, speaking of escaping, the same portal appears in their cells and they leave. As they arrive to a whole different world where the prison is there and Pete's dead corpse is also there, we meet the Prime version of Angstrom. Now, we learn that he has the ability of opening up portals to different dimensions, aka he's able to travel through the multiverse, and for now he seems to be a good guy who doesn't hurt people. He uses his powers for good and he needs their help as they agree to help him. While at school, Mark gets sympathy from the other students who feel bad after losing his dad. As we see Amber tries to help him through this day, Mark feels responsible for the deaths of Chicago and feels like he should be protecting the people at all times and he shouldn't be at school, as he wants to make up for what he believes was a mistake. But I personally believe he also feels the fear that his dad will arrive at any point and he wants to be prepared. As Mark meets up with Cecil, he wants to skip school altogether and he wants to take up on his offer that he gave him last season, but Cecil has been watching him and he doesn't believe that he's ready yet. Now, Mark won't take no for an answer and he will continue to be the hero that he believes he is, as he promises that he will not become his father. As we see, Cecil is very concerned about putting his trust into Mark after what happened with Omni-Man. Meanwhile, the Guardians of the Globe are battling a new villain who goes by the name of Giant, who in the comics is said to have a very similar strength of an average Ventrumite, and he has the mental capacity of an 8-year-old. You see, the Guardians are still not as good as the last Guardians of the Globe, but they are definitely working together a lot better than when we last saw them last season, as it appears that Monster Girl and Ruby have grown closer as well, and now he's in a suit and he's learning what fear is actually like. Back with Angstrom and the twins, he shows them his encoder. Now, this has the ability to read and copy humans' minds, but he can't get it to work without them, as they want to know what's in it for them. As he says, he'll grant them access to any dimension that they choose, as they agree to help as long as he finds them a world that has no superheroes, good food, and that they will be looked at as gods. As we find out that all of these different dimensions are slightly similar, but most of them are completely different. As the Prime one that we've been following was the only Earth in which Mark doesn't choose to help his dad in taking over the planet, as Angstrom plans to take each dimension's uniqueness and share them amongst the other worlds in order to make them better and helping them in their needs, which to me sounds a lot like what Viltrum plan is, but so far he seems to be a good person with good intentions regardless of him working with bad guys. as he introduces the twins to his alternate versions, and if this was the MCU, his variants. While most of them are extremely intelligent and they know their world's key features and uniqueness, none of them have the ability to accessing the multiverse, as the encoder will be used to access the knowledge of all of them all at once. We see Olga checking in on Debbie before heading back home, and she sees that she needs help, and she gives her this mysterious card for someone that helped her after she lost her husband last season. Now it's going to be interesting to figure out who this mystery person is that's supposed to help Debbie, which, speaking of Debbie, I'm very interested to see how she's going to manage to deal with losing her trust in her husband Nolan. Back with the Guardians, Cecil isn't happy with the progress of their work as a team, and he blames it on their lack of leadership as he introduces them to their new leader to take over for Ruby, and it is no other than Immortal. He doesn't stop there as he adds more muscle to the team by adding a new character by the name of Bulletproof, who in the comics actually filled in for Invincible every now and then. As we finally get to see our prime version of Eve as Mark and her catch up, and she tries to give him a pep talk to let him know that he's not his dad. Which right now, this "you're not gonna be your dad" seems to be a very big theme of this new season, from seeing the alternate universes and learning that Mark actually teams up with his dad, to seeing people like Cecil doubting the trust of Mark. It will be very interesting to see what will happen if and when his dad reappears, and will he immediately want to fight his dad, or will he potentially join him? In this episode, with Mark paying a visit to Cecil again, he's ready to work for him. He has perfect timing because they have been tracking the twins as they see that they have activated their machine, and Cecil wants Mark to stop them. As the 1,000 minds of Angstroms are synced together, the twins let him know that he can't forget who he is, as Angstrom promises that he's ready, and in comes Invincible and the fight begins. Angstrom tries to convince Mark that he is doing this for the greater good, but it is hard to believe and trust him after seeing what he walked into, plus he's heard that line before, as Angstrom calls him back up all the previous Maulers he's worked with that couldn't help get his encoder to work, as they have arrived to stop and kill Invincible. Now, Invincible manages to hold them off for a little bit, but unfortunately he is overwhelmed and beaten down, as Angstrom wants them to stop because they're going to kill him. He doesn't want to watch someone hurt, let alone get killed. As he continues to see this happen, he eventually unplugs himself and causes complete chaos and destruction, killing everyone except for Mark, who is really showing that he is invincible. As the Guardians arrive, them and Cecil are proud of Invincible, but he feels bad for not being able to save the others, as this is reminding him what happened back in Chicago. Our final moments show both Mark and Amber are excited and happy to get accepted in the same college, as Immortal pays Mark a visit because he doesn't necessarily trust him, and he promises he's going to keep an eye out on him. As the mid-credit scene shows that one of the twins actually survived, as well as Angstrom is now mutated and he has gained most of the alternate memories, and he blames Invincible for what just happened, which the Mauler says that this is just one of the memories talking. He's confusing all this of what actually happened. He doesn't want to listen, and he wants revenge and promises to kill. We are here breaking down Season 2, Episode 2 of... As we open with Mark's, or should I call him Marcus Sebastian's, graduation, as he's nowhere to be found because he's too busy fighting against the return of Doc Seismic. Last time we saw him was making new friends who were made out of lava, as he's preparing to destroy every single building made on Earth, and he's starting with the Washington Monument. As he begins wreaking havoc, we meet these friends who go by the name of the Magma Knights, as this time around Invincible doesn't have the help of Adam Eve, as we see the Doctor and his friends are getting the upper hand and winning this fight against Mark, up until we see Invincible pushing himself as he takes them out and gives the Doc a seismic uppercut that, I'm not gonna lie, I was surprised it didn't completely take off his head, as Mark makes it just in time to celebrate his graduation. Before moving on, we all gotta take a moment to say congratulations to Marcus/Invincible for winning his first fight, one of many in this very episode. Back at Eve's treehouse, we see William wondering what everyone's plans are for their summer vacations, as we see everyone's just having a good time, having a good laugh, and relaxing, which is the complete opposite of what Mark is doing, because he's just so laser focused on getting a call from Cecil because he's on duty and he's taking this very seriously. Cut to catching up with the astronauts Invincible saved from Mars back in season 1, as one of them wants to strike first with the help of Invincible just in case those Segwits attack Earth. Meanwhile, the one astronaut who went by the name of Russ, whose human form was taken by a Martian who escaped his own planet, is acting very unnatural as a human, but many are believing that this is coming after the events of coming back from Mars, as Russ is beyond afraid of being caught. Again, no one seems to be that concerned about his strange behavior, but he is put on a leave of absence as he has to figure out what he's going to do on his time on Earth. As Eve continues to find her own path of being her own hero, she takes it upon herself to cutting through the red tape of the governmental guidelines, and she uses her powers that initially scared the surrounding public, but she's here to help rebuild one of the many buildings that were destroyed in Chicago by Omni-Man. See, the people who live in these buildings really appreciate her efforts, but she doesn't just stop there. She proceeds to building a community park on top of an abandoned lot that has been abandoned for over 6 years, something that she'll regret a little bit later in this episode as she receives a call from her mother. Back home, Debbie upsets Mark by offering to take him on a graduation trip to get his mind off of everything going on, but he wants to stay behind and he wants to be available as a hero just in case he gets a call from Cecil. We see Debbie accidentally mentions that he doesn't have to prove to anyone that he's not becoming his dad, which we all know is a sensitive subject for him right now, as he actually gets a call from Cecil and we see Mark leaving this conversation. Back at the Guardians headquarters, we see that they are all exhausted after experiencing one of Immortal's tough training regimens, but Immortal's got a little bit more on his mind than just training, as we see that him and Kate are now a thing, which Rex doesn't approve of this. As the story is starting to come together with Russ, as he's watching a program that's honoring the previous Guardians, they put a spotlight on Martian Man, which seems to spark this idea for Russ that he can make Earth his permanent home, but also he gets this idea that maybe he can join the Guardians as the previous Martian Man's replacement. As Invincible's next mission from Cecil is to head into Midnight City, aka Gotham City, which has been under a curse for almost 20 years, as Cecil has him look into some recent sightings he's got from people claiming they have seen Darkwing around, which we all know he was murdered last season. Invincible finds this impersonator just before killing a criminal. We get more Batman references, as Darkwing 2.0 was actually his assistant who went by the name of Nightboy, who's taken up this mantle. Nightboy knows Invincible is Mark and immediately starts a fight with Invincible and is surprisingly holding his own in this fight with the help of an exoskeleton which Darkwing created to fight against super beings like Invincible. But the upgrade is the least of Invincible's worries, as he's thrown into the dangerous Shadowverse by Nightboy. As we get our first look at Mark as Invincible seamlessly tapping into his darker side as he traps Nightboy in the Shadowverse with him and threatens to allow these creatures to eat him, and even says,
"Like you said, I'm Omni-Man's son. You have no idea what I'm capable of."
Now this threat convinces Nightboy to free him from this Shadowverse, as Invincible eventually knocks him out. I want to backtrack a bit because I wonder if this Shadowverse will be used again and if we'll see maybe some demons from this Shadowverse, or does this have any potential connections to Darkblood, or could we potentially see this being a holding place for threats such as Invincible or maybe even Omni-Man? But also, for those keeping track at home, this is the second fight that Invincible has won in this episode, as we see he's getting more and more confident with his skills and his abilities, but also I want to note that he's getting more aggressive and a little bit more sinister in doing so. Now Cecil, on the other hand, has Debbie to deal with, as he slips up and makes a remark about Mark taking orders unlike his dad, as he immediately apologizes for those comments and he promises Debbie that he's not having him on any dangerous missions, and he is assuring her that he's looking after him. Now this somewhat heated exchange is cut short after Debbie brings up a question that I had after seeing Donald in last week's episode. How in the hell is he alive after blowing up last season? Did Cecil make a deal with the demon? Is Donald some type of robot or creation from the GDA? I also want to know, do you all trust Cecil telling Debbie that everything's fine between him and Mark? I'm personally kind of 50-50 because I understand his position based on what happened in his relationship with Nolan. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you trust Cecil? And again, what do you all think of how Donald is still alive? As Eve pays a visit to her mom after receiving her call, we learn that her parents are actually struggling with money, as she immediately creates food for them to have as her dad walks in seeing this with his Burger Mart uniform on. See that he's lost his job and he blames the Supes for destroying the corporate offices in Chicago, as her dad wants no handouts whatsoever. We see Eve leaving them, and she leaves them with a 24-karat gold apple and hopes they'll use this and sell this to help get by. After watching that Adam Eve special that Amazon dropped earlier this year, I really like where they're taking Eve's story and showing her dealing with the balance of being a superhero with no support from her family. Personally, I like her mom. She's good in my books, even though she lets her husband say some terrible things to Eve every now and then. Which, speaking of her husband, I am not a fan of him, but I am very interested to see where this family situation is going to go this season. And will we have to see Eve maybe having to pick between saving her mom and her dad at some point in the season? Very curious to see where all this is going. But again, I'm a big fan of Eve, and I really like what they're doing with her character so far. Speaking of liking what they're doing with the character, it's nice to see this other side of Amber so far this season, as her and Mark are finally being honest with each other and they're on the same page, as we see him taking a page out of his father's book and he takes her on a date to Las Vegas, but it's unfortunately kind of shortly lived because Cecil gives him a call. Just taking a note of this, with Mark's remarks about his dad earlier in this episode and now doing this move, which is very much a Nolan move, I wonder if Mark is subconsciously becoming closer to becoming his dad. Going back to Cecil, after the Atlanteans lost their king and Mark's dad was obviously responsible for that, they have threatened to take out the eastern seaboard unless Invincible agrees to marrying the king's widow, the queen. And I have to say, I love how this season so far hasn't forgotten about the consequences of what Omni-Man not only did in the finale, but also his actions dating all the way back to the first episode when he killed all of the Guardians. As Invincible deals with that, we see Cecil gets yet another call, and it's about the return of the Lizard League, who was mentioned back in season 1, but we also got to see them in action being taken down by the Guardians in the opening scene of that Adam Eve special episode, and they definitely are like a nod at the Marvel Comics Serpent Society, or even in the DC comics like the Cobras, but they are definitely not being taken seriously in this universe. Now, Cecil sends the Guardians in to take down this Lizard League, which they do with ease, but they're also introduced to Russ, who now goes by the name of Shapesmith, as he definitely seems to have been inspired by Martian Man to be a superhero. Back with Invincible, he meets the Atlanteans under the sea, and he tells the queen that he's not wanting to be the king because he's in a committed relationship, but he finds out that's not what she wants. Instead, she wants a trial by combat against her death thriller. Now, at first, our boy Invincible is getting his ass handed to him as he normally does, and he actually has to call in help from Cecil, who drops bombs into the water, hitting the creature, but it accidentally releases the creature, leaving Invincible with a choice. Does he save the Atlanteans who were just trying to kill him, or does he let them die? Now, this is an Invincible moment as he shows that he's not his father. He actually goes back and tries to save them, which he inevitably does. And for not the first time or the second, but the third time in this episode, Invincible handles his business by defeating this monster, as we see the Atlanteans call it even. But Cecil, doing his Cecil thing, he notices that the creature made a noise that temporarily affected Invincible during their fight, and he tells the team to research this, as it's pretty safe to assume that he's taking this as a backup plan for not only Invincible, but maybe for the return of Omni-Man. As we end the episode with Eve seeing that her dad threw out all the things that she made to help them kind of get by, but there's a little bit more reason, a little bit more deeper meaning to why he did this, as she shows her that that lot that she built the park on was unstable and fell apart, and some of the civilians were hurt during this incident. As her dad goes on and gives her this speech telling her that her power doesn't mean that she can just break the rules, and her powers don't make her a hero, but makes her dangerous. This is one of the reasons why I love this show so much, when it poses this question of, when do heroes act on their own accords, or do they have to have boundaries and rules? Because if we go back to the previous scene, Cecil called off Invincible to not intervene with that monster, but if he didn't do that, maybe the Atlanteans would have eventually taken down the monster and then eventually taken down Earth. So again, the question at hand, who does the heroes listen to? Do they go by the rules? Do they make their own call? I love when the show poses what does it mean to be a hero, because they do it so damn well. Back home, after trying to get back to work and selling a house, we see her having a little bit of a breakdown in front of her potential buyers after seeing the husband treating his wife disrespectfully, as Debbie says under her breath that the wife isn't a pet, which we know is a nod to what Nolan thought of her. as we see her breaking this cabinet in the kitchen, which had an issue closing earlier in this episode, and to me kind of represented her not being able to close the door on what happened, and obviously her relationship with her husband Nolan, and leading her to having this breakdown in this very scene. Now Mark arrives home and he sees his mom breaking down, but that doesn't stop her from letting it out as Mark has to comfort her. We see the Guardians have invited Smith into their headquarters to show him what a future of them joining potentially looks like, which I'm not gonna lie, I'm surprised by how quickly they let him into his headquarters, not knowing what their intentions truly are. Even Rudy brings up this question, but Smith assures that he was born a baby on planet Earth and promises to use his abilities for good. Cut to Mars as a reminder to seeing what the Segweg did to Mars and most likely headed to Earth next. Back at the Lizard headquarters, they watch their new leader who's shot in the head by who I assume is the Lizard King who broke out of jail, as our mid-credit scene takes us to a US Pentagon somewhere in the multiverse where this Earth's Mark is held captive after his Earth managed to take down Omni-Man with these quantum bombs, as we see Angstrom learns how they got him, and we see that this Earth's version of Cecil and Donald are actually women, as Angstrom suggests that they make him pay for what he did, as it's safe to assume that he's going around to different universes to find out a way to defeat. You're here talking season 2, episode 3 of As if not losing her husband was enough, we open this episode with seeing Debbie dropping off Mark to college. She just wants Mark to try to enjoy the college experience and not be so focused on being the superhero Invincible. As she leaves him with some motherly advice, even though Mark's a superhero, don't do drugs, and now with Mark out of the house, it's time for Debbie to call that number that Ogle gave her back in episode 1 so she can finally get some help. As we see Mark and William establishing the rules as best friends now turned roommates, as Mark throws away his old toys, almost like he's throwing away his childhood to become the superhero, but also to become the man that he wants to be. Which, speaking of becoming a man, we see Amber's roommate hasn't arrived quite yet, which means the room is available for her and Mark to finally get intimate for the very first time, which clearly shows they're taking the next steps in their relationship. And as they're getting intimate, we venture off into
This missive, this machination. We begin on the planet Europa.
Centuries ago, it was a peaceful and thriving planet until destruction came in the form of Viltrumites. As centuries went by, they rebelled together and fought with what appeared to be the null energy that we saw back in episode 1 on the other universe, but unfortunately, this doesn't stop the Viltrumite, but instead, this causes them to completely wiping them out. Except for some of the Unopas that managed to escape, which, by the way, in that flashback, was that a young Nolan who was a part of that attack? Now, within a generation, we see them rebuilding their population with breeding camps across space, and with them managing to survive that invasion, that got the attention of Thetis, who, by the way, is voiced by Optimus Prime, Peter Cullen, who happens to be the leader of the coalition of planets who invite their leader Marvin and his species to join their ranks. And together they stand in unity to defeat the Viltrumites. As we learn, their breeding camps were not just designed to continue their species, but also to create genetically enhanced soldiers to defeat the Viltrumites in combat, but ultimately the results weren't good until Alan was born, the first and only success. Now we cut to seeing Alan on his very first mission, which unfortunately he does get defeated by a Viltrumite, which caused him to have a career change as he became a planetary evaluation officer, and we know the rest of the story from back in season 1, as his mistake led him to finding Mark. Something to change the entire universe, you have to be. With hope on his side, we see Alan's day-to-day at work, and we meet his girlfriend, General Talia, as we learn that the Viltrumites just attacked another planet, putting the pressure on the coalition to finding more allies, which we know Alan informs the others the good news about Mark and tells them what happened with Nolan and Mark's decision to standing up against him. A Viltrumite versus another Viltrumite hasn't happened since the Great Purge, which is very interesting. I'm very excited to learn more about that purge, but some of the members fear Mark can't be trusted. But Thetis sees this as the first weakness they found against the Viltrumite, as they have a lot to discuss about moving forward. Now we see Thetis has a sidebar with Alan about fears that a member of the coalition may be in cahoots with the Viltrumites, and he wants Alan to investigate this, which we'll be discussing that a little bit later. But first, we get a hilarious moment in the show where the narrator doesn't know where to continue the story because both main characters in the episode are both engaging in sexual activities, leaving us with hanging out with Alan's pet. As Alan and General Talia are out for dinner, we see Alan begins to tell her about the suspicions of this mole, and out of nowhere he's attacked by a trio of Viltrumites. Now, they want Alan to tell them everything he knows about Nolan. Did he have an heir? Why did he abandon his post on Earth? As this clearly shows that this is proof that there is indeed a mole within the coalition, because this was everything Alan had just told them. As Alan refuses to tell them anything, we see him getting beaten by this trio as they knock his eye out, chop off his arm, and hit him with a deadly blow by punching his guts out, all while Talia watches from afar. This was so brutal and quite frankly sad to watch, as Alan is put in a recovery bay, barely holding on to his life. As Talia goes off to get her revenge, we see Thetis turns off Alan's life support, and it appears that maybe he might be the mole, but I think that this is a mislead. So I believe Thetis turned off the machine to take Alan under his own care and make it appear that Alan had died and have him recover on the sidelines, and when he's healed, he can secretly discover who the actual mole is without anyone knowing because they believe he died. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that's where they're going. Now, this ends this chapter of the episode as we switch over to what has to be the longest post-credit scene of all time. As we cut over to seeing the Guardians at their headquarters, where Rex and Kate are still at odds with her being with Immortal, as she tells him that she connects with him because of the simple fact that he's died just as many times as she has, and that means something to her. As we see, Rex really can't get over the fact that he was cheated on. I wonder if this will make him want to be a better superhero to kind of win Kate back in the process, and maybe he'll sacrifice himself to save Kate because he knows that death means something to her. Meanwhile, we see that the Shapesmith has indeed been welcomed into the Guardians. We also see that William is studying his brain to find out his flaws within his fears. As Monster Girl doesn't think that this is the best way for him to continue his journey on becoming more like a human, as we see him overcoming a fear as he asks Amanda out for a date for a movie. Now back with Debbie, she's attending this meeting for the spouses of superheroes, where we meet Carol, who appears to be very friendly and the head of the support group. So the big question is, will this be the help that Debbie needs? Well, for now, she takes up an offer to hanging out with one of the members, which went by the name of Theo, as they go out for drinks and she doesn't have to worry about Mark being at school. Now, we learn at the bar that the person that Debbie went out with, who went by the name of Theo, was actually the husband of the Green Ghost, who we know was a previous member of the Guardians and was another victim of Nolan's murders. Will Debbie tell him who her husband is? We'll discuss that a little bit later. Now, back on date night, we see Ruby and Amanda go to the movies to see a horror movie, which is always a great choice. She actually takes him to get his first burger as well. Now, with Ruby's fear plot, with Monster Girl, and Rex trying to get back with Kate, I'm very curious on what's in store for them. Are they setting up some type of tragedy coming for the Guardians of the Globe? Now, back at Mark and William's dorm room, we learn that William's ex-boyfriend Rick, who was turned into a zombie robot last season, is apparently doing better and will be released soon. I'm not sure if they're going to release him into society or if he's been fully turned back to a human. I'm very curious to see what they do with that. But they get a surprise knock at the door, and it's Mark's toy come to life, the Seance Dog, as he says he's from another dimension, which clearly freaks Mark out, and they begin to fight. Now, this was all a disguise meant to disarm Mark. This character goes by the name of Nuezad, who comes from the planet Trixa, and he's traveled more than his lifespan to find Mark. Now, he tells Mark that his planet is being destroyed by meteors, as Invincible's name is starting to spread across the galaxy. Now, there apparently are over 42 million bug species that need his help, and William encourages him to go because last time he didn't help, he regretted it, aka his hesitancy from helping Rick last season, which is such a great callback. We see Cecil orders Mark to not do this and even mentions his father being disobedient, but Mark stands his ground and he takes on this mission to help. Now, Mark tells Amber that his mission is going to take a few weeks, and Amber is more than understanding of the situation because he's saving lives. This is a huge moment for them because this is clearly a different side of Amber. She's more understanding because they now are being truthful. As Mark leaves her, he tells her that he loves her, but unfortunately the call drops as he begins his 6-day trip to protect this species. Now we end this episode back on Earth as Debbie is outside of the bar crying. As the green ghost ex-husband checks in on her, she ends up telling him who her husband is, and she wishes that Nolan was actually dead. But unfortunately, that doesn't stop Theo from telling her that she should have never came to the group and she shouldn't return, and he goes a step further and tells her she should have known who and what Nolan was capable of. Now I'm starting to think, who were the other significant others of the people within this group? Did Nolan have anything to do with their deaths? I didn't expect to end the episode on this planet so quickly, but we're here now, and it appears that the mission was a lie as Mark bows his head to greet their leader. Mark looks up to hearing a very familiar voice, and is no other than his dad, Omni-Man, who's welcoming him to his planet. Now question. Is this really Omni-Man? Is this Nolan? The reason I say this is because when we met this new creature from this planet, he was in disguise. He was playing as Mark's toy to disarm him, to make him think that this is someone that he's loved. Maybe their leader did the same thing, and that really wasn't Nolan. They're just tricking Mark to do something under the idea that this is his father. And another reason I don't think this is Nolan, and I actually don't think that this scenario is actually happening, because I want to point out, number one, they said it was going to be 6 days to arrive in this planet. That took a lot quicker than 6 days. And I want to go back to the scene where we actually see, it feels like it's a dream-like sequence from the flash to white to the music playing in the background. Is this a dream? Is this made up? Or is this maybe a part of the species' abilities to disguise this whole situation? Or this could be Nolan, this could be his dad, live and in the flesh, because the last line of him saying, "Hello, son, it's been a while," is actually the title of next week's episode, which will be the end of part 1 of this new season. We are here to talk about the season 2, episode 4, and the end of part 1 of... As we open with the day Omni-Man almost killed his own son Mark and left thousands dead in Chicago as he took off into space in search for answers of who he's become. We see that Nolan has been traveling across space long enough for him to grow a full beard. As he stares into the soul of space, he continues to drift further into the galaxy until he comes across a destroyed planet, and at the exact same time, a group of aliens and a broken ship from Thraxa are about to fly directly into his destruction. Until Nolan stops this ship and he saves them. As he guides them back to their home planet and he's about to head off back to his journey of self-discovery, they yell out thanking him and they welcome him to stay and to let them know who he is and where he comes from, as this seemed to be the perfect opportunity for Nolan to start over. This is a perfect example of why I love this show so much, because as we'll talk about later in the breakdown, as this show is starting to build this redemption arc for Nolan, it was great to see him leaving Earth and that he wasn't just normally okay, he wasn't just fine with what just happened, he was heartbroken, he was destroyed about what he just did to his son, what he did to those people in Chicago, what he said about Debbie. So I love that they showed that Nolan was definitely heartbroken, and like I mentioned, the redemption arc starts now. As we immediately cut back to last week's cliffhanger, as we see Mark slowly walks up to him, and there's some caution going on there. There's a little bit of anger built up in Mark, as it should be, as Nolan prepares to potentially get into another fight with his son, but Mark goes in for the hug. Now, Nolan tells Mark that he missed him, but the Thraxans need his help right now. But this father and son reunion doesn't last long because Mark calls him out for being a liar, number one, to get him here, just like he lied about who he was and what his purpose was back on Earth. Now, Mark reminds Nolan what he did to those people back on Earth and calling his mom a pet, as Nolan in his own kind of way tries to apologize, but Mark doesn't care and he tells him that he can go screw himself and he takes off, but Nolan follows him. Nolan tells Mark that he must come with him and he has to show him something very important, and these people do indeed need his help, as Mark agrees to stay behind just for 5 minutes as he's about to learn the truth. Now, we learn that Nolan didn't conquer this planet, but he was given the title as their new emperor, but that's not all, as Mark sees his dad kissing another woman and he officially meets his new stepmom, but also his new baby brother. Now, this is a lot for Mark to take in right now, and personally, I don't blame his reaction at all, because this is a lot to process, and as we'll learn, this planet learns how to process things a lot faster than humans do on Earth, so we're going to focus a lot on this father and son reunion, everything going on Thraxa at the end of this breakdown, but I want to switch gears and focus on the supporting cast. We get this perfect mirror parallel sequence with what we saw with Nolan going on at the end of last season, as we tie this into what's going on with Debbie. who's walking in the streets barefooted, and she's just completely lost, just like Nolan was at the end of season 1. Which ultimately leads her to his grave and wondering why her. 20 years down the drain and a relationship built on a lie, and Debbie feels like she never knew who Nolan truly was. We later see Debbie getting a visit from Art in this episode, who tells her that he's always believed that she was the strong one in the relationship, she was the real superhero, that she kept things afloat for this family by taking care of Omni-Man and Nolan, but also taking care of their son Mark. And more importantly, Art brings up she was the reason that Earth wasn't taken over by Nolan 20 years ago, because he saw the beauty of humanity, and that was something that was so key. I love that scene between Debbie and Art because she is her own person, and I think that these encouraging words just reminded her that she's more than just Omni-Man's wife. As we later on see Debbie gathering up all his books, which were important for a little bit later in this breakdown, and she tells Cecil that she no longer wants his money, she no longer wants Nolan's money from these books, because she wants this money to, number one, go to the survivors of Chicago, but also she doesn't want to be owed anything for Cecil. Debbie won't be changing her mind about this as she leaves those books on the curb for the trash to pick up. This is the stuff that I really love about what's going on with Debbie. This isn't just something she can just forget about and just move on with. I love that the show is taking the time and showing her grieving, but also showing us as an audience that she does have that courage, she does have that power to moving on from Nolan. But as we'll talk about later, maybe she'll have some feelings about Nolan when she learns out what happened on this planet Thraxa. Meanwhile, we see the Mauler twin who survived that explosion back in episode 1 has created his clone, and no more debating because for the first time they know who the clone is. As the original, or as he calls himself, King Mauler, he has the clone at the beginning gathering up all the materials they need to make more of himself after getting the idea from seeing all the different versions of themselves from the multiverse. Now, speaking of clones, throughout this episode, we see Donald trying to figure out why Debbie was so shocked to see him from a couple episodes ago, as he went over to her house when she wasn't there, and he ended up finding his glasses in that rubble from the explosion, which, by the way, I don't know how the hell he found those glasses there, but anyway, he finds the glasses from the house from last year that it was exploded when he was trying to sacrifice himself to slow down Omni-Man. As we see him eventually hacking into the GDA surveillance footage where he sees exactly what happened to him. As the theme of discovering oneself continues with Eve, she runs into Amber and William at school, who she's looking for Mark, but finds out that he's on a mission in space, but they notice that something's off about Eve, and they want to help her out and want to hang out with her. She promises them that she'll catch up with them in the following day, as we know that she's still very bothered by what happened at the park that she built, but also what her father told her about her powers being dangerous. Now, back at the Guardians headquarters, it seems as everyone's off doing their own mission because we don't see the Guardians in this episode. As Eve is crashing there, she hears a loud noise in the background. She goes to check on it, and she finds her favorite villain of the week, no one other than Kill Cannon, who's still in some type of device that Robot Man made. Now, he's in the facility, and all this pent-up anger, all this aggression, Eve's ready for a fight. She's looking for a fight, as we see her being a little bit cocky because she is managing to take him down pretty easy, and we know she's always taken him down, even when she was a kid, and we saw that in her special episode earlier this year. But again, we see Eve is tapping into her anger side and not really focusing on making sure that the innocent civilians aren't caught in between this battle, as we see that she kind of underestimates Kill Cannon and his counterattack, which leads to a couple in a car being thrown off a bridge, and we're kind of left to believe that maybe they're gonna die or maybe they're gonna fight for their life, which we know Eve's gonna blame herself about what just happened. And again, whether it's Nolan opening up this episode trying to find out who he is, seeing Debbie going on her own self journey, seeing Eve trying to see the hero she wants to be, to Donald literally trying to figure out who he is, I love that theme in this episode. But we now are going to get back to that father and son awkward reunion. Now, Mark feels like him and his mom have simply been replaced by bugs, but no one tells him that's not the case, that he was lost after what happened on Earth, and he was able to help them, and by saving their lives, he felt like he had purpose again. Now, Nolan tells Mark the real reason he needs him is because that there are Viltrumites that will be looking for Nolan after his actions and will be searching for him, and he needs Mark's help to fight against them, but also they need to protect his planet, but he also needs to protect his new baby brother, who will be targeted for being inferior to them and going against the procreation with the lesser species. Mark, yet again, is right by his response to his father, who now wants him to protect his baby brother that he just met, but he also wants him to stand up for these people that he don't know, and his father is a liar, and also, need I remind you, last time they saw each other, he was trying to kill him. But unfortunately, time is up as those same Viltrumites who attacked and almost killed Alan have arrived. Mark is tasked with getting his new stepmom and brother to safety while Nolan holds them off. Mark takes them into the caves for hiding and has a moment with his new stepmom and learns that his brother gets to actually pick his name when the right time comes about, but also he learns that this species only exists for 1 year, but their son has a slow aging because of Nolan. Now, she tells Mark about her relationship with Nolan and that yes, his father is definitely a complicated individual, but someone she loves, and that Nolan loves Mark regardless of what happened last time they saw each other. Now, this very touching moment is cut short by Lucan, who tells Mark he must prove himself worthy or else he dies. Now, Mark must fight to protect them, but unfortunately he isn't trained enough to go against a Viltrumite, as we see his head getting pushed into the ground with a single finger. As Nolan arrives, we get to see two peak Viltrumites going toe-to-toe, Lucan versus Nolan, and for the first time in the show, two trained Viltrumites going toe-to-toe, and this scene did not disappoint, as Nolan uses his signature move and cuts Lucan's stomach open, and he appears to kill him with a finishing blow, which is grabbing a rock and stabbing it right into his guts. This scene was amazing. But they still have two Viltrumites to take down. Now, as Nolan and Mark head back, they see the others have unfortunately been killed by the remaining two Viltrumites, as Nolan briefly taps back into his old self and he chokes Mark and he questions his emotional state. Why should he care about their deaths? As Mark tells him this is how he should have felt when he was back on Earth. But again, no time to self-reflect, as we see those Viltrumites are here to finish their mission and they're here to kill Nolan. Now, after mocking Nolan about this species that they just killed, we are about to get a 2v2 for the ages. Now, we know Mark is improperly trained to take on a Viltrumite, as Nolan's technically going 2v1, and he has to help Mark throughout this fight, but there's a brief moment between the fight where we see Nolan telling Mark, "You're holding back, son," and Mark tells him, "I don't want to kill anyone," but Nolan reminds him it's either kill or be killed, and then also that his brother's life is on the line, and it is time to fight like a Viltrumite. As we see my boy Mark, Invincible, takes the advice from his father, and not only does he hold his own against this Viltrumite, but he almost defeats this Viltrumite, but doesn't land the killing blow, as we see this incredible cut sequence of all the crazy, insane, visceral punches being thrown between these Viltrumites. Now, Mark is almost killed, but Nolan splits the one Viltrumite's head and breaks the other's lower jaw. Love the scene so much, as Nolan goes back to check on his son, but unfortunately he is kicked directly in his back, breaking his spine by Lucan, who calls in the reinforcements. As we see the Viltrumites gathering their wounded soldiers, and they take Nolan, as he tells Mark to not forget the good that he's done, all the work that he's put in, but also to read those books that we know his mother has taken out to be thrown away. As we end this epic episode with Eve back home with her parents, Debbie appearing to get back on track, and she seems to be heading back to work herself. Meanwhile, Donald cuts himself to see if he still bleeds, and he's relieved that yes, there's blood coming out of his arm, but he also notices that the knife is bent, meaning that he might be some part man, part robot. As Mark wakes up, he's introduced to General Creed, and he tells Mark that based on his survival, he's proven himself worthy, but he now must finish the job that his father wasn't able to do back on Earth. As he tells Mark that his father will indeed die, and if Mark doesn't complete this mission on conquering Earth, they will come to pay Earth a visit and will kill millions, and unlike Nolan, they don't change their minds. I'm telling y'all right now, I can't wait to see more of General Creed. I can't wait to see my man Mark, aka Invincible, get his payback. But we end this episode with the end credits showing the Mauler's twin, and the one clone, having being called the clone so many times, gets upset. He kills the original, and we see that they're completing their work to get more of themselves as clones. So major questions going into part 2. What will Eve do about her future as a hero? Will she rejoin the Guardians, or will she continue her solo missions? I personally feel as though she'll probably join the Guardians and kind of build that up again, which I personally am okay with. I love the Eve character, and I love the journey we've been on so far with that character. Which, speaking of, we didn't see the Guardians in this episode, but I'm very much interested to see the relationship building between Ruby and Amanda continue to grow, but also what's going to happen between this love triangle between Immortal, Rex, and Kate. Now, will Debbie continue this path of forgetting Nolan? And more importantly, how will Debbie react when she hears the news from Mark, who will let her know about everything that went down on Threxa? Will she be excited to hear the good news that Nolan seems to be getting back on the man that she used to know? Or will she be upset, but also there's a threat coming to Earth? How will Debbie react to that? Which is the biggest question. Will Mark take on his heritage and finish the mission on conquering Earth? Or, which I feel will end up being his choice, will Mark gather all the heroes and villains to work together to fight against the enemies? I don't think this is the last time we've seen Nolan, y'all. Like, we need to get his redemption arc. He needs to continue to build himself up for what he did to Chicago, and also what he did to calling his wife a pet and also almost killing his son. So I definitely believe we're going to see Nolan, we're going to see heroes and villains working together to protect Earth. But also, can I throw into the mix, maybe Mark's baby brother will age up by then and he'll also join the fight as well. But not like I need to remind you all, but also there are still other threats to look out for. We have the Maulers and their whole twin situation and them building more clones. We have the squids from Mars. We have the lizard lead. And can't forget about the multiversal villain Angstrom, who I'm sure has found a way to defeat Mark throughout his travels in the multiverse. Overall, this episode was a great mid-season finale and did such a great job of having characters like Mark, Nolan, Debbie, Eve, and even Donald go through these somewhat self-reflection journeys within this episode and learning who they are and who they want to be and the struggles that came with that. It was just so well done, so well acted. In the action scenes, let's just talk about that right now. The show never disappoints when it comes to action, but this 2v2 or 2v1 Viltrumite versus Viltrumite, to me, was definitely some of the best fighting sequences of this show, and it might be in my top 3 fights of the series so far. I can't wait to see what happens next, which I believe we can probably expect part 2 sometime early 2024. I'm thinking maybe early February, late March. Either way, I can't wait till next year. This will end my recap and breakdown of episode 4 and my recap of the completion of part 1 of season 2 of Invincible. I want to take this time to thank you all for watching. I would really appreciate it if you can hit that like button, share your thoughts, your theories, and your comments. I haven't read the comics, so please try to stay away from spoilers, but definitely share your thoughts on this finale and what you all hope to see in part 2, as well as consider subscribing to the channel. Check out my playlist of all of my Invincible coverage, but also check out my latest review. You all are awesome. Hope you're staying safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.
Yeah.